Hello everybody. In this video we're going to take a look at a couple of videos coming out of China that have been popping up on my feed about these guys breaking some bricks. We're going to analyze the techniques that they use, learn all the tricks, and even point out a couple of sneaky underhanded tricks that they use in addition to the tricks for breaking to make the breaks just a little bit easier. Now this first one at a glance, pretty impressive, and even when you know what's happening, it's still pretty impressive. He's going to break this brick with 2 fingers, but I want you to pay attention to how the brick is supported on that slab there. So as he goes, he does this brick, and bam, right here. So, a couple of things to notice. First, let's zoom in on this brick a little bit. What do you notice about the color of that brick? Look at the outside compared to the inside. The inside is significantly darker. Even in this blurry resolution you can see. That's what's known as black coring, or sometimes called reduction core. And what that does is it tends to lead to bloat during the firing of the bricks, and it reduces the compression strength significantly. So basically, what this guy is doing is he's using low quality bricks to make it a lot easier to do this break when he doesn't have to. And I'll explain to you at the end how you can do it with a high quality brick. Again, here we see he's going to do a brick. Now this time he's got 2 of them. I'll explain that at the end of the video as well and explain why he has to have 2 of them. But yet again, you see the black coring, even worse than in the first one, but you also see on the side there's burn scorch marks showing that it was overfired. Now here he's breaking 2 bricks. Pay attention to that gap in the middle. That's going to be really important later. As he goes to break the brick, the first time through, you'll see he only breaks 1 of them. Just that first one that he punches broke. Now the second one, what you can't see, is it actually cracked. That's the initial reason that he had the gap between the 2. And it's why when he did the punch break, holding onto them, he had 2 bricks. What the gap in between the bricks does is it basically allows you to slam the bricks together. And where you're pushing them together, that little halfway mark creates a shearing force and it breaks them. Now, it's difficult to do with such a small gap. So that's why when he had him hanging, he threw that punch. The first one broke. The second one only cracked. So when he came through with that second punch, it broke apart pretty easily. Quite honestly, he probably could have just grabbed the brick and pulled it apart. The punching one where he was holding it, though, the reason that one broke both of them is because it had nowhere to go. When it was hanging, there was no resistance coming from the other side, so as he punched it, created impulse, the brick started to swing. Whereas where he's holding on to it, when he hits it, the hand that's holding the bricks is applying a force in the opposite direction, preventing them from going flying, making it so that the force of his punch is concentrated entirely into that brick. So you remember how I told you to keep an eye on how he has the brick on that slab? Well, what that slab is doing is it's replacing the other brick that he used when he breaks 2 of them. He's slamming the first brick, or the only brick in this case, against that granite slab underneath to create that shearing force. That's why it's hanging halfway off. You can actually see here as we zoom in, he lifts the brick right at the moment of impact. And you can see right about here, his hand hides the lift, but moves out of the way just in time for you to see that he actually lifts it up, allowing him to slam it against the slab of cement or granite, whatever's underneath, to create that shearing force and break the brick. That is the most important trick to doing a brick break, is you have to have something for it to hit against to create that shearing force. Bricks are designed to be compressed, so without having some sort of gap or something to hit it against to create a shearing force, it's not going to break, which is why you don't see the smaller red bricks like this being broken down the middle like you do with the bigger concrete slabs. Breaking is a trick. Now, when I say breaking is a trick, I don't mean that it's some sort of sneaky thing that, using pre-broken bricks, or, well, maybe these guys are. We can't say for sure. They're willing to use low-quality bricks, so maybe they are. But typically, even breaking a board, there's a trick to it. In the same way that sleight of hand magic is a trick. It's not actual magic. You do very specific things to give the illusion of magic. And it's the same thing with braking. You don't have to be super strong. You don't have to spend decades of training in some sort of martial art to be able to do it. All you need to know is how it's done. Practice it a few times, and you'll be able to do it. Breaking a board, you could probably learn how to do it in a few minutes. Breaking a brick, you might want to take a few weeks to condition your body so you don't cut up your hands, or at the very least put a towel of some kind over it to prevent the clay or the cement, concrete, whatever you're using to break your hands. But once you know the trick, it becomes a lot easier and a lot less mentally taxing. So now, let's go over some of the tricks on how to break a board, how to break a brick, how you can do it without using underhanded tricks like terrible quality bricks, and use everyday material that you could just find at your local hardware store. So we're going to go ahead and start by discussing the brick. Now, what I did is I just went to the hardware store, found a brick that looked about right. I like to use the Holland pavers. The stone that they're made out of is Portland cement mixed with gravel, so they're specifically designed to have a significantly high compression strength, which does make them a little bit more difficult to break, but that's all that more impressive for this trick. Right? So once we have our pavers, what we're going to do is we're going to set up the structure that we're going to sit it on. What you need is something solid to support the back of the brick that goes about halfway up the brick. And then I recommend having some sort of weight or maybe a smaller slab of cement in front of the brick to prevent that bottom part from flying back out at you. Once you have that set up, set the brick up just as it's shown here. Now, what's a little difficult to see, but I'm sure you can see if you zoom in, is that there is a slight gap between the red paver and the cement blocks behind it. That gap is what's going to allow me to have a shearing force, even doing a technique over a short distance, such as this 3-inch punch. The stone that's being broken here is a Belgian stone brick, which is made out of granite. But here, you'll be able to see the lifting technique as demonstrated in the first video in action, and you can see why it's so important to have that space between the bricks when you go to break them.
There you go. There.
To replicate the breaking bricks while holding them, I decided to use 3-inch Holland pavers instead of the standard 2-inch, so they were a little bit more difficult to hold onto. But again, as you can see here, the space in between is super important, and just like in the video we saw earlier of the Kung Fu Master, the first one breaks no problem, leaving the second one cracked to just pull apart. Now, the other common thing to break is boards. It's very common to see different types of boards being broken in different types of martial arts for various purposes. Some places require you to break a board to get the next belt. Some people just do it for different demonstrations. A very popular one you'll see is the Korean national taekwondo team doing board breaks, but the boards that they use are what are known as demo boards. They're super thin, roughly 1/4 to sometimes just under 1/2 inch, but they're made out of 3 separate boards that are just pressed together. Now, demo boards are designed to break, so if you're doing some sort of public demonstration where it's really about just trying to look cool and it's about the aesthetic and not really trying to demonstrate any significant amount of skill, these are perfect. But as you can see, they just break on their own. So they're really not much of a challenge at all, and aren't really the best if you're trying to showcase technique or even a neat parlor trick, because they break on their own. I recommend if you want to do a real break, just go to the hardware store, get some 1-inch thick pine. You can buy an 8 or 10 foot plank, cut it into 1 foot or even 10-inch long sections. Now, for most straight breaks, it doesn't matter which way the grain is going, but typically you want to break with the grain. If you're doing a horizontal strike, you want the grain to be horizontal like this. If you're doing a vertical strike, you want it to be up and down. Make sure you're not going to cut your foot. Now, the boards will have some sort of arch in them like this, usually with the grain. It's a little bit easier to break going into the arch, like shown here, this orientation, but if you're big enough, it really doesn't make much difference. So now let's talk about the tips and tricks of breaking this pine board that you just got. So the first trick is you have to go through the board. If you stop at the board, doesn't matter how hard you hit it, you're going to stop at the board. You need your force to carry through. Now, as I mentioned before, you want to make sure the grain is going the proper direction so that you don't cut up your hand or your foot, your elbow, whatever you're breaking with. If you're using a horizontal strike coming around, maybe a hook or a roundhouse kick, you want to make sure the grain is going horizontally, not vertically. The type of break we're going to demonstrate here is called a power break. Now, a power break, you have it set up on some sort of support. Make sure you hit the middle, not the sides, not the top, or the bottom. Otherwise, you're not going to break the board, and if you hit it away from the supports, it's just going to go flying. But as long as you hit center, between the supports, and you go through, the board's going to break pretty easily. So that's it. Those are the tricks to breaking bricks and boards and everything in between. You don't have to use underhanded tricks like pre-breaking any boards or bricks or getting really low-quality building material that was thrown out at a local junkyard. You can use any construction material that you're willing to waste your money on. Personally, I think it would be a much better use to build something with those bricks and boards, but hey, you do you. Thanks for watching.